Welcome to Arlington National Cemetery's Tomb of the Unknown Soldier Centennial Commemoration Lecture Series. My name is Allison Finkelstein, and I serve as Arlington's senior historian. For this episode, our featured expert is Mr. Tim Frank. Tim serves as a historian at Arlington National Cemetery. He studied history in college and graduate school and has been at Arlington National Cemetery since 2016. Prior to that, he was a historian at the Naval History and Heritage Command at the Washington Navy Yard. In his episode titled Silence and Respect, A History of Tomb Guards, he will provide a short history of the evolution of the tomb guards, from a civilian watchman to the soldiers who serve at the tomb today.
During any given year, millions of visitors from the United States and around the world visit Arlington National Cemetery to see the historic sites and watch the changing of the guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier. With their immaculate uniforms and precise routines, the tomb guards of the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Regiment, known as the Old Guard, are iconic and even mythologized figures. The tomb guards honor the unknowns through the precision and perfection of their rituals, yet the Old Guard did not always watch over the tomb. Indeed, during its early years, the tomb was not guarded at all. Nonetheless, there was no dedicated guard at the tomb until November 17, 1925. Civilian guards stood watch at the Memorial Amphitheater as part of their duties, and they would have interacted with visitors at the tomb, but there was no dedicated guard at the tomb. Some Army officials, however, began advocating for a military guard at the tomb itself. In September 1922, Major R.H. Fletcher, Jr. returned from Europe after visiting the tombs of the British, French, and Italian unknowns. He immediately wrote to the Adjutant General with his observations and suggested that an armed sentry be placed to the tomb to guard the site and require men to uncover their heads when approaching. The Quartermaster General's office and the Adjutant General's office both took up the matter. Quartermaster Supply Officer H.C. Bonnycastle wrote to the Quartermaster General, quote, "The placing of an armed sentry at the tomb of the unknown soldier in Arlington National Cemetery would no doubt be a symbol of deep respect for those who lost their lives in the World War," end quote. Yet other high-ranking Army leaders opposed such calls to place a guard at the tomb. Brigadier General H.H. Bonholtz, for example, argued that, as is well known, the average visitor to Washington or the average citizen of the city can reach the distantly located tomb only with great difficulty, and it is not and never will be visited by thousands of visitors as is done in England, France, and Italy. He went on to say that the placing of an armed sentry at this tomb during the day would not lend dignity to the shrine, and would under local conditions work a real hardship on the soldier required to do sentry duty there. And in time, this feeling of irritation, transmitted from century to century, would unquestionably detract from the respect and veneration in which the shrine is now held by our soldiers. Furthermore, the average visitor to the tomb would not be impressed, or would probably not even notice the fact that a sentry was stationed nearby." End quote. Of course, Bonholtz could never have imagined that not thousands, but millions would visit the tomb in the years to come. As military officials debated calls for an armed sentry at the tomb, citizens groups also weighed in. The National American War Mothers, which played a key role in shaping the tomb's evolving status as a national shrine, supported placing a guard at the site. In 1922, the War Mothers member Mrs. Catherine Chamberlain wrote to Secretary of War John Weeks stating, quote, "The mothers feel that the public should show more reverence at the tomb of our unknown hero if a sentinel were to be on guard during the day," end quote. Secretary Weeks responded that while the question had been considered, there was no place at Memorial Amphitheater to quarter a guard. Although he agreed that an armed sentry would lend dignity to the shrine, the posting and relieving of a sentry would be inconvenient, as Fort Myer, where the guards would be quartered, although in the vicinity of the cemetery, was quite a distance from the amphitheater. Throughout 1923, citizens and members of Congress and groups such as the National American War Mothers and the Disabled American Veterans continued to inquire about and voice support for an armed sentry. Ms. Mabel Brown of Norfolk, Virginia, for example, informed General John J. Pershing that during her visit to Arlington on February 11, 1923, she had observed 3 photographers soliciting business and, quote, "2 groups of laughing, thoughtless women," unquote, standing, sitting, and leaning on the tomb as they posed for a photograph, while other groups stood about laughing and talking. She compared this disrespectful atmosphere to the dignity that she had witnessed at the tombs in London, Paris, and in Rome. She also noted that the guard at the amphitheater was, of all things, directing automobiles, which she saw as less important than guarding the tomb against irreverence. General Pershing replied that while it was impractical to maintain an armed sentry at the tomb, steps had been taken to prevent photographers from taking photographs in the manner noted in her letter. A February 15, 1923 letter to the editor of the Washington Post entitled, quote, "Irreverence at Arlington," similarly lamented that women posed on the tomb for commercial photographers and men did not remove their hats. The letter was signed, quote, "A Visitor," unquote. It was most likely authored by Mabel Brown, since it had some of the same themes that she had mentioned to General Pershing. Other complaints throughout the year finally caused General William H. Hartz to write to the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff. Hartz assured him that picnickers were not allowed in the tomb's vicinity, and that the site was under the constant watch of the civilian Memorial Amphitheater Guard, whose strict orders were to keep visitors from the top of the tomb. He went on to say, quote, "Any endeavor by a guard, either military or civil, to attempt forcibly to regulate the personal deportment of visitors would undoubtedly be resented and possibly resisted, with resultant unpleasant scenes, more provocative of scandal than the isolated incidents of individual lack of reverence," unquote. He also pointed out that, quote, "A neat picket fence now protects the tomb from encroachment," end quote. It took over 2 more years for the Army to designate civilian guards specifically to guard the tomb. In early October of 1925, Representative Fletcher B. Swank, a congressman from Oklahoma, visited Arlington and immediately wrote to Secretary of War Weeks to voice his concern about newspapers' reports recounting, quote, "desecrations of the tomb," end quote. Swank confirmed that 3 civilian guards watched the Memorial Amphitheater and its surroundings, including the tomb, but he also recommended a constant guard whose only duty would be to protect the tomb. He further asked if soldiers, sailors, or Marines could be detailed in shifts of 8 hours for this duty. The new Secretary of War, Dwight F. Davis, gave Swank the usual response that there were no quarters for guards at the site, and that posting and relieving an armed sentry would be inconvenient given the distance between Fort Myer and the tomb. According to cemetery records, on November 17, 1925, the Army ordered civilian guards to begin patrolling the area around the tomb during daylight hours. By March 1926, the constant complaints of disrespectful behavior at the tomb and a looming bill in Congress to require a military guard prompted President Calvin Coolidge to step in. On March 9, 1926, the Washington Herald reported, quote, "By order of President Coolidge, a uniformed military guard will be stationed in the Arlington Cemetery to prevent desecration of the tomb of the unknown soldier," end quote. The article explained that, quote, "The tomb has become a rendezvous for picnickers who leave refuse there, souvenir hunters have chipped marble from the base, and boys have been shooting craps on top of the tomb," end quote. The proposed legislation, introduced by Representative Alan J. Furlow of Minnesota and supported by the American Legion, would not be necessary. Coolidge simply ordered the War Department to take action on the issue. Army Chief of Staff Major General J.L. Hines immediately sent a memorandum and a copy of the Washington Herald article to the Adjutant General stating that the Secretary of War was directing the Commanding General of the District of Washington to investigate and report back on his findings. Days later, Brigadier General Samuel D. Rockenbach reported that he had obtained information from the watchman and from personal examination of the site. He noted that the watchman was on duty from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. while the cemetery was open to the public, and his observations disputed the Washington Herald's reporting. He concluded that there had been no desecration of the tomb or any lack of veneration on the part of the public. Nonetheless, on March 24, 1926, Major General Fox Connor, Deputy Chief of Staff, informed the Adjutant General that the Secretary of War desired orders to establish an armed guard at the tomb. As a result of this, Commanding General, District of Washington, was then informed that effective March 25, 1926, an armed military guard would be placed at the tomb during the hours that the cemetery was open to the public. The Quartermaster General would also maintain a civilian watchman. Secretary of War Davis then notified Congress that the proposed legislation was not needed. After the Army began guarding the tomb, some minor controversies continued. Whereas editorials and letters to newspapers once lamented the lack of a guard at the tomb, such writings now indicated that not everyone was pleased with the guards. For instance, a few months after guards had been posted, Mr. Charles F. Miller from Collingwood, New Jersey, wrote to the Evening Star, quote, "Last Sunday, about 2 p.m., we walked up with reverence before the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington and paused for about 2 seconds. Immediately, the guard of honor accosted us with a curt, 'Move on.' followed with "No hangers-on allowed." The words and tone were the most uncouth that I have come in contact with in some time. My reverence before the tomb was changed to anger. But I said not a word, the presence of the ladies with me forbidding, and the shrine being no place for any altercation." End quote. After reading the above account in the Evening Star, the Army Chief of Staff's office sent the clipping to the Adjutant General's office for comment. Brigadier General Rochenbach, under whose purview the guards fell, immediately investigated. He replied that the civilian watchman flatly denied Mr. Miller's allegation, as did the enlisted soldier on duty that day. Rochenbach concluded that in the absence of a formal complaint and witnesses, the matter should be dropped. To this day, the tomb guards occasionally get complaints from visitors after a guard corrects them for such infractions as talking loudly or sitting on the plaza railings. By 1932, according to some accounts, 1 million people a year were visiting the tomb, and public concern for and interest in the guard grew. In February 1934, Miss Florence Sullivan of Washington, D.C. wrote to President Franklin D. Roosevelt to express her concerns about the suffering that guard duty at the tomb must entail. The Army Adjutant General assured her that, quote, "soldiers assigned to this duty suffer no hardship, thereby, as sentinels are relieved every 2 hours and always have at least 4 hours rest between tours of duty." It may be stated further that assignments for this important detail are in demand among the enlisted men eligible, therefore, and that they are justly proud of being assigned to this duty, end quote. Until July 1937, military personnel from Fort Myer, Fort Belvoir, and Fort Washington guarded the tomb during cemetery hours in 2-week details. Effective July 1937, the guards were placed on a 24-hour schedule, and the complement increased. According to cemetery records, 4 groups consisted of 1 NCO and 3 privates each, guarding for 12 hours on and 12 hours off, with each individual sentinel guarding for 2 hours with 4 hours off. In early December 1940, the Adjutant General directed that the Guard would be selected from personnel under the control of the Commanding General, Washington Provisional Brigade. On December 6, 1940, Commanding General John N. Greeley revoked part of the 1926 directive calling for guards from Fort Humphreys, which is now Fort Belvoir, and directed them that effective January 16, 1941, the commanding officers of the 3rd Cavalry of Fort Myer and the 12th Infantry of the Arlington Cantonment would provide guards from specifically selected squads for 15-day assignments. On April 6, 1948, the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, known as the Old Guard, was reactivated, and they took over the responsibility of guarding the tomb. Under the Old Guard, the men and later women who guarded the tomb grew increasingly prominent in the public consciousness. Visitors to Arlington National Cemetery had steadily increased since the 1932 completion of the Memorial Bridge, which connected the cemetery to Washington. Moreover, beginning in 1947, World War II repatriations brought a new generation of families to Arlington to pay their respects and remember their fallen loved ones. In this context, the tomb guards became iconic figures. During the 1950s, U.S. newspapers lauded the tomb guards as the finest examples of honorable American military traditions. Chicago Daily News correspondent William McGaffin wrote in an article published on Veterans Day, November 11, 1956, quote, "One of the most moving sights in the world is the way the lone soldier assigned to guard the tomb walks his post with profound dignity and respect," end quote. He emphasized that in addition to height and physical fitness requirements, the guards must be of excellent moral character with no conviction or violation of the law other than minor traffic violations, be sober, have a good family background, and be a good citizen with no immediate family member living, quote, "in an area under communist domination," end quote. Over time, such laudatory descriptions morphed into the legends that persist today. The history of the tomb guards was not without controversy, however. One controversial incident occurred during the first year that the Old Guard began its watch of the tomb. Around midnight on November 27, 1948, William O'Connor, a 20-year-old private on duty at the tomb, fired 2 warning shots at a prowler. One of the bullets pierced the wall of Florida Hall in Arlington Farms and hit a 24-year-old wife of an Army officer below the knee. She went to Walter Reed Hospital and later sued the government. The private was described by his commanding officer as, quote, "one of the finest soldiers in the ceremonial company of the 3rd Infantry Regiment," end quote. According to an Army spokesman, he faced no disciplinary action because he had been, quote, "acting within orders." At least one newspaper article, however, emphasized the potential lethality of such mistakes, pointing out that the type of rifle used by the tomb guards, quote, "can kill at 1,000 yards. It is regarded as more effective than other weapons in case a gang of hoodlums should descend upon the tomb," end quote. 6 years later, in January 1954, The standard operating procedure for the guards was changed to read, quote, "No ammunition is authorized for use by this guard," end quote. As the tomb guard's cultural visibility increased, the Army also took steps to recognize the specific nature of their service. Over time, the guarding of the tomb became a distinguished and sought-after assignment. On 7 February 1958, Major General John Van Houten, Commanding General, Military District of Washington, presented a newly created Tomb Guard identification badge to the sentinels who stood guard over the tomb. Badge number 1 was presented to the Sergeant of the Guard, William E. Daniel, who served at the tomb from February 1957 to June 1960. It's one of the Army's least awarded badges and can be earned only after strict selection process and intensive training. As of 2021, almost 700 Tomb Guard badges have been awarded. Originally, guards received the commendation letter, certificate, or ribbon when they moved to their next assignment, but the badge itself was to be turned in and passed on to the next guard. On November 6, 1963, the old guard requested that the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier identification badge be awarded permanently to a tomb guard after 9 months of honorable service. Eventually, that change was added to the regulation, and the tomb guards are now presented numbered badges after they successfully complete their training. Other changes in the 1970s further increased the tomb guard's visibility and iconic status. In March 1975, the Army completed a major renovation of the Memorial Amphitheater that included the construction of a viewing terrace for the public to watch the changing of the guard. The renovation also created dedicated guard quarters in the amphitheater where the guards could rest or work while on duty. They no longer had to train in the cramped rooms in what's known as the catacombs under the Memorial Amphitheater. By the way, this might be where the rumor that they live under the tomb came from. The tomb guards themselves also changed during the late 20th century, becoming increasingly reflective of America's diversity. In 1961, for example, Specialist 4 Fred Moore became the first African-American tomb guard, and in 1996, Sergeant Heather Lynn Johnson became the first female sentinel. To date, 5 women have earned the badge. More recently, in 2020, Sergeant First Class Chelsea Porterfield became the first female sergeant of the Guard. Today, the tomb guards continue to honor the unknowns through the precision and perfection of their rituals. To hold this sacred duty, soldiers must undergo a rigorous process of selection and training. Soldiers assigned to the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, regardless of military occupational specialty, gender, or age, must volunteer by applying for appointment to the tomb through the Sergeant of the Guard. According to the Old Guard, to be considered for an appointment, a soldier must be highly motivated, disciplined, and possess a strong military bearing. If appointed, the soldier is assigned to the tomb for a 2-week temporary duty, or TDY, training and assessment process. Only 10% of trainees ultimately earn the badge. The training period focuses on basic changing of the guard sequences, uniform preparation, and memorization of knowledge about the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and Arlington National Cemetery. At the conclusion of the 2 weeks, the soldier is tested in these areas. If successful in testing, the soldier begins 6 to 9 months of apprenticeship-like training, where soldiers focus on perfecting their uniform, verbatim memorization of a 17-page information packet, outside ceremonial performance, and basic soldiering skills. During the second training period after the TDY graduation, trainees are referred to as tomb guards. The term sentinel is only used for a guard that has completed training. They have a 9-day work set. Days 1, 3, and 5 are 26 hours. Days 2 and 4 are 22 hours off. Days 6, 7, and 8 are days off. And then they come back in the morning on day 9 for training before they go back to their day 1 rotation. Once a soldier achieves the highest standard in all 3 testing categories, they're awarded the Guard Tomb of the Unknown Soldier Identification Badge, one of the least awarded badges in the United States military. Badges have actually been revoked when a soldier does something that would bring dishonor upon the tomb or the Army, whether they're on active duty or later in life. Such revocations are rare, however, as current and former tomb guards tend to keep exceptionally high standards both in and out of uniform. Thus, what began as a reluctant and inconvenient post for a lone military guard now garners widespread public respect and admiration. As a result of their revered status and high public visibility, numerous myths and misconceptions about the tomb guards began to circulate on the internet and social media. According to one such legend, during Hurricane Isabel in September of 2003, tomb guards disobeyed their commander's direct order to secure their post and to seek shelter from the high winds and flying debris, choosing instead to continue guarding the tomb. Numerous sources have debunked this false claim, but it persists on the internet. Another widely circulated legend holds that tomb guards are not allowed to speak during their first 6 months of their tour, to watch television, or to swear in public for the rest of their lives. What was once viewed as an unnecessary and potentially irritating post, according to early correspondence, It is now a prestigious position for the few who are selected to guard the tomb. Sentinels are the first to say that their service is not about themselves. It is about the 3 unknown service members from World War I, World War II, and the Korean War, those who remain unaccounted for from the Vietnam War, and all missing and unrecoverable American service members around the globe. The Sentinels strive for perfection in all that they do in order to honor those who lost both their lives and their identities in military service. And today they play an integral role in the rituals of remembrance at the tomb of the unknown soldier.